Ladies and gentlemen, would Moses go to Harvard? Please welcome Lawfare Project founder and director, Brooke Goldstein, UC Santa Barbara student, Efram Shalinov, and your host, Newsweek senior editor-at-large and host of The Josh Hammer Show, Josh Hammer.
Okay, good afternoon, CPAC. How are we doing today? So I am your moderator for Would Moses Go to Harvard, Josh Hammer. We are thrilled to be joined here in conversation by the indispensable Brooke Goldstein. She's the executive director of the Lawfare Project and the author of the forthcoming book, End Jew Hatred, A Manual for Mobilization, as well as UC Santa Barbara sophomore currently studying computer science, Efram Shalinov, who is also an End Jew Hatred fellow. We'll hear all about that. So I'm just going to go ahead and get us started here, and then we'll kick it to the group. So I was speaking at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I guess they're college football national champions these days, whatever. But I was speaking there we have some fans. I was speaking there in November, and a very bad thing happened, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes to tell you about what happened there. So I was speaking for another conservative organization offering remarks on Israel's righteous prosecution of its war against radical Islamic jihadism in the Gaza Strip and increasingly on its northern border as well with Hezbollah up in Lebanon. And I got there to speak, and within 90 seconds or so of my opening my mouth, you had 25 to 30 students who got up in the crowd and threw their hands into the air. Their hands were all painted in blood red. They had on their shirts photos of children who have allegedly been killed in Gaza throughout this conflict, each and every one of whom, as this audience of course knows, is solely attributable to the fundamentalist Islamists in Hamas. And then a few minutes later, they started coughing. It sounded like a tuberculosis ward in there. And, a handful of minutes later, the coughing turns into shouting, "Genocide, you lie, and Palestine shall be free," all the usual disgusting Jew-hating slurs and slanders that I think this audience is familiar with. And this went on for about 35 to 40 minutes before I was able to continue my speech. It was absolutely horrific. Because University of Michigan is a public university, they are bound by the First Amendment. We looked into a possible First Amendment lawsuit. Thus far, I haven't decided to pull the trigger, but if you guys see any state representatives or congressmen or senators from Michigan, make sure to tell them what happened at an absolute bare minimum. But I say all that as context because when I was looking at these people, and one of them actually tried to make a beeline towards me in the aisle. Thankfully, I had a private security guard who jumped in front of me. You see evil. You see evil in these people's eyes. You see absolute malice, and they are so convinced that they are right and that you are the embodiment of evil. It's this whole intersectional woke mentality of oppressed versus oppressors, colonized versus colonizers. They don't care about the history. They don't care about the facts. It's really troubling stuff. So I just say that as context because I have seen what Jew hatred on campus looks like in the aftermath of October 7th, and it is really, really not pretty. So with that, then, let's kick it over to you, Brooke. You run the Lawfare Project, which, personal note, absolutely fantastic organization. You are an indispensable asset in the broader fight against this horrible, horrible disease. What legal tools have you been trying to implement since October 7th? Are there any particular cases, any particularly problematic universities that are at the center of your crosshairs right now? Just talk to us about what Lawfare Project has been doing after October 7th.
Thank you. Well, maybe our next case will be your case.
Perhaps.
Maybe that will come from this panel, hopefully. First, I want to say what an honor it is to be here and how grateful I am to be on the stage with both of you, who I admire very much. I am the proud executive director and founder of the Lawfare Project. We are a network of over 600 lawyers and 36 major law firms with the sole goal of engaging in civil rights litigation on behalf of the Jewish community. And, in my research, thank you. That's right. And I have my necklaces here, too. In my research, what was so shocking to me when I founded the Lawfare Project were two things. Number one, there has never been a Jewish civil rights movement in America. Never. Yet Jews have been at the forefront of almost every single minority rights movement in history. We were instrumental in the founding of the NAACP, in the founding of the ACLU. We marched for civil rights for the black community in the 50s and the 60s, for women's rights then and now, for gay rights, and how about for our rights? There has never been a Jews for Jews movement. And that is why we founded the End Jew Hatred movement. You can see our T-shirts here. And it is the first ever Jewish civil rights movement. And we have our proud fellow here, and he will tell us more about that. But the second thing that I learned, which really inspired me to found the Lawfare Project, is that the Jewish community has never strategically engaged in impact litigation. If you think about it, what's beautiful about our democracy is that almost every single right that we enjoy is a product of a seminal civil rights case, whether it's Roe v. Wade, which was recently overturned, whether it's Brown v. Board of Education, which led to the desegregation in American schools, or the recent lawsuit by the Asian American community, against Harvard, which ended affirmative action. And yet the Jewish community has not taken advantage of the legal system to advocate for ourselves. The truth is on our side. The law is on our side. We are the oldest, most persecuted minority community in human history. So that is why I'm very proud to announce that we have filed over 137 lawsuits in 17 jurisdictions on behalf of Jewish communities around the world. And if we have time, I will talk about it more, but I just want to mention two very briefly. We just sued Carnegie Mellon University, which is the third largest recipient of funds from Qatar. It has received over $600 million from the state of Qatar, which in my opinion is engaged in one of the most subversive influence campaigns on our college campuses. And a couple days ago, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of a Jewish American student against Columbia University, where they've allowed pro-Hamas rallies, physical violence, attacks against Jews, free speech violations against Jewish students. And I'm telling you now that this will all end now.
So Columbia University has, of course, been ground zero of this fight for a very long time. I mean, they literally invited Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, back in 06, 07, somewhere around that time. I would encourage the audience to go ahead and do some research on Qatar, which is a country that both Brooke and I are both very passionate about. Qatar plays this deeply duplicitous double-edged sword, where on the one hand, they claim to be a major non-NATO ally. Our dim-witted commander-in-chief thus designated them that. They have Al Udeid Air Base, which American military forces operate out of, while on the other hand, simultaneously while doing that, they are also funding the seeds of radical Islamism all over the world through Al Jazeera. They're pro-Islamist network. They fund the Muslim Brotherhood. They fund Hamas. They are very bad actors. I would encourage you guys to go ahead and try to lobby your congressman, frankly, to try to tamper down, ideally sever, but at a bare minimum curtail our relations with Qatar, which, far from being a major non-NATO ally, is better thought of, I think at least, as a state sponsor of terrorism. With all that said, to you, Ephraim, so you're a current sophomore at UC Santa Barbara, and your campus, like so many others, has been one of the epicenters of this great conflict that tragically is playing out not just in Gaza, but very much on the American University campus. You were instrumental in getting the UC Santa Barbara student body to issue a formal condemnation of Hamas, which on the one hand seems like it shouldn't be a big deal. It's a U.S.-designated state sponsor. It's a terrorist organization. So on the one hand, it shouldn't be a big deal, but tragically it is a big deal. And kudos to you, Mazel Tov. So why don't you tell us all about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, Josh. And it's an honor to be up on this panel with both of you. When the October 7th attack happened, two simultaneous wars erupted. One war, as you correctly pointed out, was in Gaza. But the other, and the one that is right here, is a war for the hearts and minds, particularly of young people, and particularly on college campuses. And what we've seen across the board is that academia has been fully penetrated by a toxic ideology that manifests itself in many ways, but one of its primary symptoms, like many toxic ideologies, is horrific and rampant anti-Semitism. And at UC Santa Barbara, we were able, through effective policymaking, through effective lobbying, and through the great work of many others, Colton Christiani and Michelle Lebowski in particular, to pass a condemnation of Hamas. Now, this was a more than month-long process of intense, difficult negotiations with these other student senators who are on that board. This involved precise wording, but you'd think, as you said, this would be something that's easy to do. It's not. And to date, I've heard that Brandeis, which is a Jewish university, did something somewhat similar, but it wasn't a clear condemnation of Hamas in the same way. And no other universities have been able to follow suit yet. And what we see more often is actually these BDS resolutions, these horrifically Jew-hating resolutions which single out Israel in a characteristic way. And even when we were passing this condemnation of Hamas, we had a violent protest where hundreds of pro-Hamas students came and tried to disrupt those proceedings. Since then, on campus, I've had horrible things screamed at me. Somebody yelled Heil Hitler at me. Another person said some expletives and then the word Zionist. This is a pretty common phenomenon, not just for me, but for any publicly visible Jew on any college campus in America. And I remind you, this is a top research university in what's supposed to be some sort of tolerant state.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, California is, we are told, is a bastion of freedom and civility and tolerance. And unfortunately, for the modern left, tolerance only goes one way. Again, if you are part of this oppressed group, if you are part of what the intersectional mentality says is a group that should feel sympathy, then they'll have sympathy. But if not, then, I guess you're totally just out of luck. Brooke, let's go back to you for a second here. So, you mentioned that the lawsuit with Columbia, your organization is active on university campuses across all of the country, of course, there. The civil rights movement paradigm is a very strong one, and I totally agree with you on a personal note. But as far as concrete advice to current students, when in the moment itself, right, like when they are confronted, not that literal second, but when you see a pro-Palestinian rally that's probably going to have some swastikas thrown about there, stuff like that, what would be your concrete advice to students?
So before I answer that, I just want to say that after October the 7th, so many of my friends and colleagues and people in the media, and actually one of the most questions that I'm asked most often when I go on TV is, are you surprised that this is happening? And unfortunately, I'm not, because people like you, people like me, my clients in the counterterrorism community, my friends in the moderate Muslim community have been screaming at the top of their lungs about the radicalization happening in this country, which is in part, funded by foreign states. And yet we've been marginalized. We've been slandered as Islamophobic. We've been called racist. We've been sued. And some of us have even been attacked violently. And so my advice, first and foremost, is for every single person in this room to shed the fear, shed the political correctness, and start speaking openly about the threat of theologically motivated terror. There is nothing to be ashamed of when we're talking about the national security of our great country, the United States of America, number one. Now, number two, if you are a student at these schools, and you are being discriminated against because you are Jewish, you must stand up for yourselves. Now, I will be critical of my own community because one of the mistakes that we've made is that we've centered Jewish advocacy around pro-Israel advocacy. If you want to advocate for yourself, you have to advocate for a foreign government, you have to talk about national security issues, you have to basically get a law degree, and you go on the defense, okay, and you have to defend a foreign country. Anti-Jewish discrimination is not a political issue. It is a civil rights issue. And students on campus, while they don't necessarily have the responsibility to defend Israel, they have a responsibility to defend themselves. And when something happens, stand up for yourselves. There are people there to protect you. We are here to protect you, and we will prevent any type of retaliation against you. And God forbid, and litigation is always the last resort, but if that has to happen, we will 100% support you, and we will continue to file these seminal civil rights cases on behalf of the Jewish community until we end Jew hatred in our lifetime.
Ephraim, back to you. I'm curious what your experience with the faculty has been like. Have you had any sympathetic, any pro-Israel, any pro-Western civilization, for that matter, faculty members in the history department, the political science department, or has it been fairly uniformly anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas?
That's a great question. I think there's a very interesting phenomenon, which is that faculty in the sciences, technology, engineering, and math are almost universally reasonable and hold pro-Western, pro-Israel, and pro-Jewish views. And faculty in various humanities departments are a cesspool of various debauchery. I have not yet encountered a single humanities professor speaking on any of these issues with not just to mention a reasonable belief, but with basic information, not just about the conflict, but the history. So yes, I'm a computer science student. Most of my professors are computer science professors, and they're all fantastic. And educated people with technical degrees who think critically about these issues almost universally hold reasonable views. But a kind of mob mentality in humanities departments has forced reasonable views to the fringes and has made it the only socially acceptable view to espouse is horrific Jew hatred, but also, straight up Islamism. Right? I have faculty at my own university posting that, Allah willing, Israel will be destroyed. Right? That was posted on a public Instagram of a faculty member at my university, and they faced no repercussions. Right? Despite the fact that the administration was made aware of that.
Yeah. So this Islamism mentality, again, not exclusively, but predominantly, it really is coming from Qatar, which is the world's #1 exporter of not moderate Islam, but a radical Islamist mentality, which, again, they disseminate through their Al Jazeera network. They're funding the Muslim Brotherhood. Frankly, they're funding, to a lesser extent, of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Just an absolutely horrific actor, no matter what they tell the American ruling class, and they lie through their teeth when it comes to that. Why don't we go down the line here and end on this note? So the title of our panel is, Would Moses Go to Harvard? Why don't we just go ahead and answer that question, actually. Brooke, what do you think?
Well, first of all, if he'd even be admitted to Harvard right now, the statistics are alarming, how the amount of Jews have been reduced. And even if he did get into Harvard, I'd hate to say he would be subjected to so much hostility. He might even get physically assaulted. The situation is so bad. I just want to mention one statistic. 50%, 50% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 years old say that Hamas's October the 7th terrorist attack against Israel was justified. So what is going to happen, God forbid, if there is a terrorist attack on our soil? Are 50% of American youth going to support it? This is not a Jewish issue. This is a national security issue of the highest order.
Yes.
I think Brooke makes a great point. The administrations of these top schools have been illegally and categorically discriminating in their admissions processes, and any semblance of meritocracy left here is gone. But if admitted, I think Brooke makes a solid point. It's not safe to be a Jew at Harvard. It's not safe to be a Jew anywhere in the Ivy League, and it's not safe to be a Jew at any top university in America.
Yeah, we'll just wrap up on a quick personal note. I got married 2 months ago, and my wife and I have already begun. Thank you. And we've already begun our very preliminary discussions. When we have children, God willing, what will they do in 18 years from now? And what I am hoping and praying for is that the entire American university system will be so thoroughly discredited that there will no longer be an incentive to even sign up for a 4-year degree. But having said that, at a bare minimum, the Ivy League is looking very, very bad right now.